Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov, a sleepy summary. We are going to travel gently into a small Russian town called Skotoprigonievsk, in a time when carriages creaked over frozen roads and candles guttered low in dim little rooms, and we are going to meet a strange and unhappy family called the Karamazovs. There is no need to hold on to every detail. Just let the voices and the shapes of these people wash over you, warm and low, like a lullaby hummed under someone's breath. At the center of it all is an old man named Fyodor Pavlovich Karamazov, and he is not a kind man, not a gentle one, not the sort of father you would want tucking you in at night. He is a buffoon, a clown, a man who laughs too loudly and drinks too much and thinks mostly of money and of women. And he has, over the course of his long and messy life, fathered 3 sons and possibly a 4th, though that 4th one is a secret we will come to slowly, the way secrets should be told in hushed tones near the end of the night. His first wife gave him a son named Dmitry, whom everyone calls Mitya, and then she ran away from her clownish husband and later died, and little Mitya was mostly forgotten by his father, passed from relative to relative, raised more by accident than by love. Fyodor Pavlovich married again, a quiet, trembling, frightened young woman, and she gave him 2 more sons, Ivan and Alexei, whom everyone calls Alyosha, and then she too died, worn down by fear and sorrow, and these 2 boys were also mostly forgotten, raised by a kindly servant and later by relatives, while their father drank and caroused and grew fat and sly back in his crumbling house, full of dark corners and unwashed dishes. So you see, dear listener, none of these 3 brothers grew up with any real feeling of home, any real memory of a father's steady hand or a mother's soft voice singing them to sleep. And this absence, this early coldness, hums quietly beneath everything that happens later, the way a draft moves under a door long after everyone has stopped noticing it. Now let your mind drift to each of the brothers in turn, slowly, unhurried, as if you are walking down a long, dim corridor in an old house, pausing at each door. Behind the first door is Dmitry, grown now into a large, passionate, hot-blooded soldier of a man of huge feelings and huger debts, a man who loves recklessly and drinks recklessly and cannot ever seem to find solid ground beneath his feet. He believes his father owes him money, an inheritance left by his mother, and this quarrel about money becomes tangled up, as these things always do in this story, with a quarrel about love, because both father and son have fallen in their different clumsy ways for the same woman, a merchant's mistress named Grushenka, a woman with red gold hair and a laugh that can turn a room inside out. Dmitry is engaged, officially, properly, to a proud and beautiful woman named Katerina Ivanovna, who once needed his help and his money when her own father was in disgrace, and who has loved him ever since with a fierce, wounded, complicated love that is tangled up with pride as much as tenderness. But Dmitry's heart, wild thing that it is, has slipped away from Katerina and toward Grushenka, and this triangle, father and son both circling the same woman, while a proud fiancé waits at home with her heart slowly breaking, is the storm that will soon break over the whole family. Let that image settle in your mind like a heavy stone sinking slowly through dark water. An old father and his own son, rivals for the same woman, in the same small town, under the same low grey sky. Behind the second door is Ivan, the clever one, the brother who has been to university, who writes and thinks and argues, who carries inside him an enormous and aching question, the question of whether the world, this suffering, unfair, tear-soaked world, can truly have been made by a good and loving God. Ivan cannot make his peace with the suffering of innocent children, cannot forgive a universe that allows a small child to be tormented, and he says, with a kind of exhausted grief rather than triumph, that he would rather return his ticket to this cosmic harmony than accept it at such a price. Inside Ivan is a poem, a strange dark poem he has written but never published, called The Grand Inquisitor, and one quiet evening he tells it to his younger brother Alyosha. And we will come to this poem again later, slowly, the way you might return again and again in a dream to the same room. For now, just know this: Ivan is the brother of the mind, the brother who thinks too much and feels too much and cannot make the two agree, and this unresolved war inside him will, in time, nearly cost him his sanity. Behind the third door is Alyosha, the youngest, and he is gentle, and he is good, in a way that is rare and a little startling in this loud, greedy, quarrelsome family. Alyosha has gone to live at the local monastery, where he has attached himself with total devotion to an old and saintly monk named Father Zosima, an elder beloved throughout the region for his wisdom and his kindness, and the strange calm light that seems to come off him the way warmth comes off a stove. Alyosha loves everybody, forgives everybody, moves through the story like a small quiet lamp carried from room to room. And though he is young and untested, Father Zosima tells him that his true calling is not to stay hidden away in the monastery, but to go back out into the noisy, sinning, suffering world, to be among his brothers and the people of the town, and to bring what light he can. So Alyosha steps out of the monastery and into the story, moving gently between his violent brother Dmitry and his tormented brother Ivan and his foolish, dangerous father, trying, in his quiet way, to hold the family together, even as it is already coming apart at every seam. And then there is a fourth figure, not quite a brother, not quite a servant, a strange, sallow young man named Smerdyakov, who cooks in old Fyodor Pavlovich's kitchen and is whispered to be his illegitimate son, born to a poor half-witted woman of the town years and years before. Smerdyakov is quiet and sickly, given to fits, and he watches the family with pale, unreadable eyes, and he has taught himself a cold, sneering, borrowed kind of philosophy from half-understood conversations with Ivan, a philosophy that says that if there is no God, then everything, absolutely everything, is permitted. Hold that thought gently in your mind, dear listener, the way you might hold a small cold stone in your palm without yet knowing you are holding it. It matters more than it seems. Now let the story drift forward, unhurried, the way a boat drifts down a slow river at dusk. The family gathers, at Father Zosima's monastery, ostensibly to have the wise old elder help settle the bitter quarrel between Fyodor Pavlovich and Dmitry over money and inheritance. But the meeting collapses almost at once into shouting and mockery, the old father performing his clownish buffoonery even in the holy quiet of the monastery, poking fun at monks and religion alike, until Dmitry, in a fury, seems ready to strike him. Old Father Zosima, frail and near the end of his life, does something strange and startling in that tense little room. He gets up, walks slowly to Dmitry, and bows down low all the way to the ground at his feet. No one understands why, not even Alyosha, not at first. It is only much later that the meaning of that bow becomes clear, that the old elder somehow sensed, with the strange second sight of the very holy or the very wise, the terrible suffering that lay ahead for this passionate, doomed young man, and bowed to it in advance, the way you might bow your head before a storm you can already feel coming on the wind. Let your breathing slow here, dear listener, as we sit for a while with Father Zosima, because before he dies, he tells Alyosha and tells us many gentle things. That love is the great answer to all doubt, that we are all responsible for everyone and everything, that hell is simply the inability to love, that even the smallest act of kindness ripples outward farther than we can ever know. He tells the story of his own wild youth, long ago, when he too was proud and cruel and nearly killed a man in a duel, before something inside him broke open like a seed cracking, and he understood all at once, looking at his own servant whom he had struck in anger, that he was no better than any sinner, that all of us are tangled together, guilty and beloved together, in one great web of being. He speaks, too, of a mysterious stranger he once knew who confessed to him in secret a murder committed years before, unpunished, unconfessed, and who eventually, unable to bear the guilt any longer, gave himself up publicly and was sent away to suffering and disgrace, and died soon after, but died at peace, because a confessed guilt, he said, is a lighter thing to carry than a buried one. Let this small story settle quietly into the corners of your mind, because it, too, is a seed that will grow later, in another part of this tale, in the pale, unreadable face of Smerdyakov the cook. Soon after, gently, without pain, old Father Zosima dies, and here the story allows itself a small, cruel irony, the kind that life itself so often allows. Because he was holy, many in the town expected some kind of small miracle at his death, perhaps that his body would stay fresh and sweet-smelling, as legend said good elders' bodies sometimes did. But instead, in the summer heat, his body begins to decay a little faster than expected, and the townspeople, so eager for wonders, turn on him instead, whispering that his ordinariness in death proves he was never so holy after all. Poor Alyosha, grieving and confused, wanders out of the monastery that night, shaken in his faith for the first time in his young life, and is gently, almost accidentally, tempted toward doubt and even toward vice, drawn for a moment by an old friend, a cynical seminarian, toward Grushenka's rooms of all places, the very woman his brother and his father are fighting over. But something extraordinary and small happens there instead. Grushenka, expecting to toy with the pious young monk, to mock him a little for sport, finds herself instead comforted by his gentleness, and comforts him in turn, and Alyosha leaves her rooms that night not corrupted but strangely healed, his faith slowly returning to him like colour returning to a face. He returns later to the monastery, falls into a kind of waking dream beside Father Zosima's body, dreams of a wedding at Cana of Galilee, of the old elder alive and smiling and telling him to rejoice, and wakes up outside under the vast quiet stars, and falls to his knees and weeps and kisses the earth, and something in him settles forever after that night into a deep and unshakable, if still very young and human, faith. Let your own breathing settle here too, slow and even, the way his did, under all those quiet stars. Now gently let the story turn back toward the loud, tangled, dangerous world outside the monastery, back to Dmitry and his debts and his desperate love. Dmitry owes Katerina Ivanovna a great sum of money she once entrusted to him, and his honor, such as it is, depends on paying it back, and he is desperate, chasing after schemes to raise the money, half hoping his father will finally hand over the inheritance he believes is rightfully his. Meanwhile, he is also consumed with jealous terror that his father, old and ridiculous as he is, might actually win Grushenka's affections with money and promises of marriage, and Dmitry hovers around his father's house at night in a kind of feverish, spying agony, watching for a secret signal Grushenka is supposed to give if she ever decides to visit the old man. He carries with him always a brass pestle, a small heavy tool tucked into his pocket, half-consciously, the way a person might carry a weapon they tell themselves they will never use. One night, everything comes to a boil at once. Dmitry, desperate for money and half out of his mind with jealousy, goes first to a woman named Madame Koklikov hoping to borrow funds, and is refused, offered instead some absurd advice about gold mines that he has no patience for, and then rushes off, believing Grushenka may have gone secretly to his father's house after all. He climbs into the garden, peers through a window, sees his father alone, foolish and hopeful, waiting in his nightclothes for a woman who is not coming, and something in Dmitry boils over with rage and old resentment, and he draws out the brass pestle, and he strikes his father, or seems about to, and flees the garden in a wild, confused rush, leaving his father alive but bleeding, unconscious on the floor. In his flight he strikes down an old servant, Grigory, who had raised him partly as a child, and who tries to stop him at the garden wall. And Dmitry, seeing the old man fall and bleed, pauses in horror, tries clumsily to help him, and then, still not knowing whether he has killed his own father or the old servant, flees into the night, his hands and clothes stained with blood, toward the one place his heart is dragging him, toward Grushenka, wherever she has gone. He finds at last that Grushenka has secretly travelled to a nearby town to meet a former lover, a Polish officer who abandoned her years before and has now returned, and Dmitry, sick with jealousy and grief and guilt, he cannot yet fully name even to himself, follows her there, determined perhaps to kill himself if he has lost her, carrying with him money he has scraped together, some of it, unbeknownst even to himself in his fevered state, belonging in part to Katerina. Money he now spends wildly on one last great desperate party, a night of wine and gypsy singers and reckless spending, a final glorious ruinous celebration before whatever end is coming for him. And it is there, in the middle of that strange feverish party, glasses spilling, music playing, Grushenka finally turning back toward him with real tenderness now that her old Polish lover has revealed himself as shabby and mercenary. It is there that the police arrive, quietly, gravely, to arrest Dmitry Karamazov for the murder of his father, because old Fyodor Pavlovitch is dead. Someone struck him and killed him that same night, and robbed him too of an envelope of money he had set aside, marked and ribboned, meant, everyone believed, for Grushenka should she ever come to him. And every circumstance, every scrap of evidence, points with terrible clarity toward Dmitry, his hatred of his father, his desperate need for money, his jealous rage that very night, the blood on his hands and clothes, his wild flight, his sudden burst of spending at the party as though he had come suddenly into money. Dmitry is arrested, and he is bewildered, and he weeps, and he swears over and over in a kind of anguished, half-mad sincerity that he struck old Grigory but did not kill his father, that whatever else he is guilty of, however low and reckless and cruel his heart has sometimes been, he did not do this one terrible thing. And here is a strange, sad truth the story asks us to sit with quietly. Dmitry is not innocent, not really, not in his heart. He has hated his father, has wished him dead, has raised his hand against him in violence that very night, and yet he did not deal the final blow. Before we go further, let your mind rest a moment on Dmitry in the hours right after his arrest, because the story lingers there too, patient and unhurried, the way we are lingering now. He is taken to a room in the little inn where his wild party had been happening only moments before, and there, under lantern light, tired officials begin the long, slow work of questioning him, and of stripping him, gently but thoroughly, of his fine party clothes, to be studied for bloodstains, and Dmitry, proud and humiliated all at once, standing half-dressed and shivering in that cold official room, feels for the first time the true weight of what is happening to him. Feels it settle onto his shoulders the way a stranger's cold, wet coat might settle onto a person who never asked to wear it. He answers their questions in bursts, sometimes proud and scornful, sometimes weeping and pleading, telling them again and again the same simple, confused truth, that he ran from the garden with old Grigory's blood on his hands, believing perhaps he had killed the old servant, that he never went back inside to strike his father, that whatever money he had spent so wildly that night at the party had been sewn, half of it, into a little cloth pouch he had worn around his neck for weeks. Ashamed money, borrowed money, money he had meant to return to Katerina, but instead, in his despair, had finally spent. No one quite believes him. The officials write everything down in their slow, careful hand, and Dmitry watches them write. And somewhere in that watching, in that long cold night of questions, something in him begins already quietly to change. The wildness in him starting to bank down like a fire left too long without new wood, not gone out, never quite gone out, but banked and low and waiting. Let your thoughts drift too gently to the women who love him, because their stories deserve a moment of their own quiet light. Katerina Ivanovna, so proud, so composed on the surface, carries beneath that composure an old wound from years before, from a time when her own father, a colonel, was disgraced and in danger of ruin, and young Dmitry, then a dashing officer, secretly gave her the money to save her family's honor, asking nothing in return, not even that she come to thank him. And Katerina, moved to something between gratitude and love and a fierce, wounded pride at having been so helped, came to him instead, offered herself to him in a moment of desperate courage, and Dmitry, gentleman enough in his own wild way, let her go untouched. And it is out of this strange debt of honor, half love and half obligation, that their engagement was born, a bond that was never quite free, never quite light, always carrying the old weight of rescue and gratitude and pride tangled together like roots grown through one another underground. And Grushenka, for her part, carries her own old wound too, the memory of a Polish officer who loved her when she was very young, and abandoned her, and left her to be taken in and half-owned by an old merchant who kept her comfortable, but never quite let her go, so that by the time old Fyodor Pavlovitch and young Dmitry both came circling around her like moths around two different candles, she had already learned to protect herself with mockery and teasing and a hard little laugh, testing everyone who came near her to see whether they loved her truly or merely wanted her. And it takes the whole long unfolding of this story before she finally lets herself believe that Dmitry's love, wild and unworthy, as he often seems even to himself, is real, and lets herself love him back without her old armor. Let your mind drift once more, softly, to Father Zosima's own past, the story he told the young Alyosha and the others who gathered in his cell in his last days, because it explains so much about the gentle wisdom he carried. As a young man, Zosima was not holy at all, but proud and hot-tempered and vain, an officer much like Dmitry in his wildness, who once struck his own orderly, an old and patient servant, twice across the face in a fit of temper over some small mistake, and who challenged another man to a duel over a matter of jealous pride concerning a woman he fancied himself in love with. But the night before the duel, alone in his room, something shifted in him, some old memory of his dying brother from childhood, a gentle boy who had, in his last days, been filled with a strange, radiant love for everyone and everything, birds and trees and servants alike, saying that we are all guilty before all, for everything, and that people simply do not know this yet. And this memory rose up in the young Zosima that night like water rising in a well. And in the morning he went to the duel and let his opponent fire first, and then threw his own pistol into the woods and asked forgiveness, right there on the dueling ground, of the man he had meant to shoot. And everyone thought him mad or a coward, but he did not care because something large and quiet had opened up inside him, and soon after he sought out his old orderly, the man he had struck, and begged his forgiveness on his knees, and then, not long after that, gave up his commission entirely and went to a monastery, where he remained, growing slowly into the calm, radiant, listening old man that Alyosha and so many others in the town came to love. He tells, too, in those same last days, of the mysterious visitor, a respected and wealthy man of the town who came to him secretly one night and confessed, trembling, that 14 years before he had murdered a woman who had refused his love, and let another man be wrongly punished for it, an innocent man who had died of illness in prison still carrying the blame. And this secret had eaten at the visitor for 14 years, like a slow, quiet fire under floorboards, until finally, unable to bear it any longer, he came to Zosima for counsel, and Zosima urged him gently toward the harder, truer road. Not silent penance alone, but open confession out loud before the whole town, whatever ruin that confession might bring down upon him. And in time, after much anguish, the man did confess, publicly, dramatically, to a town that mostly refused to believe him, thinking him simply gone mad, and he was never punished by any court, but he was already dying quietly of an illness of his own, and he died soon after his confession, but died light, Zosima said, died unburdened, having finally set down a weight he had carried alone in the dark for 14 long years. Let this small buried story rest quietly now in the back of your mind, dear listener, the way a seed rests quietly in the dark soil of winter, because you will feel its shape again, faintly, echoing, when we come at last to Smerdyakov. Let the story rest a moment here, dear listener, while your eyes grow heavier, because we must go now and find out who did. It was Smerdyakov, the pale, quiet cook, the one who had absorbed Ivan's cold philosophy that if there is no God then everything is permitted, and had turned that philosophy slowly, secretly, into a plan. He had learned the secret signal by which Grushenka might announce her visit to old Fyodor Pavlovitch, and on the night of the murder, feigning one of his epileptic fits, so that no one would suspect him of being anywhere but sick in his bed, he had instead crept to the old man's room, given the false signal, been let inside, and killed him, and taken the ribboned envelope of money for himself, and hidden it away, and returned to his bed to groan and feign sickness, while the household discovered the body, and the whole town turned its fury and suspicion onto poor reckless Dmitry, who had, after all, been seen fleeing bloodied from that very garden that very night, though it was old Grigory's blood, not his father's, on his hands. And here the story turns, gently, sorrowfully, toward Ivan, the brother of the mind, because Ivan comes slowly, sickeningly, to realize that it may have been his own careless words, his own cold philosophy tossed off in idle conversation, that gave Smerdyakov both the idea and the justification for murder, that in some terrible sense he, Ivan, is the true author of the crime even though his own hands are clean. He goes to see Smerdyakov 3 times, in a kind of grim compulsive pilgrimage, and each time Smerdyakov, sly and bitter and dying now of his own guilt, reveals a little more of the truth, needling Ivan with the suggestion that Ivan himself wanted the murder to happen, that Ivan left town on the very night of the crime, almost as if he had arranged to be elsewhere, that Ivan is, in his heart, the murderer's true father, the one who planted the idea, even if Smerdyakov's hand held the pestle. On the third visit, Smerdyakov finally confesses everything plainly, hands over the stolen money, tells Ivan he did it all believing Ivan wanted it and would reward him for it, and tells him with a terrible flat calm that he, Smerdyakov, will confess nothing to any court, and that same night alone Smerdyakov hangs himself, leaving behind a short note confessing to the murder in his own hand, so that he might, in his own twisted way, destroy himself of his own will, refusing anyone else the credit or the blame. Ivan, carrying the stolen money and the terrible unconfessed knowledge of his own moral guilt, begins to unravel. He is consumed by fever, by visions, and one long strange night he is visited, or seems to be visited, by a shabby, aging, faintly ridiculous gentleman who claims to be the devil, who sits and chats with him in a mocking, worldly, almost bored tone about God and doubt and human folly, echoing back to Ivan, in a horrible funhouse mirror, all of Ivan's own coldest and cruelest thoughts, until Ivan, in a fury of horror and self-loathing, throws a glass at the apparition, and it vanishes. And Alyosha arrives just then with the news that Smerdyakov has hanged himself, and Ivan collapses into a raging brain fever from which he will be a long time recovering, if he recovers at all. Let us pause here, gently, in the quiet after that storm, and remember the poem Ivan once told to Alyosha, the poem called The Grand Inquisitor, because it belongs here too, folded into the heart of the story like a smaller story hidden inside a larger one. In it, Ivan imagines that Christ returns quietly to earth during the Spanish Inquisition, performs small gentle miracles, is recognized and loved by the common people, and is promptly arrested by the Grand Inquisitor, an old cardinal who visits him alone in his prison cell at night, and tells him, with a kind of weary, sorrowful contempt, that the Church no longer needs him, that humanity does not want the terrible burden of freedom that Christ offered them in the wilderness so long ago, does not want to choose good freely and bear the anguish of that choice, but wants instead bread and miracle and authority, wants to be told what to believe and be fed and be ruled, and that the Church, in its wisdom, has corrected Christ's error and taken that terrible gift of freedom back from the people for their own good. Christ says nothing throughout the entire speech, and at the end simply leans forward and kisses the old inquisitor gently on his bloodless lips, and the old man, shaken, opens the cell door and tells him to go and never come back. It is a poem about doubt and freedom and love and the terrible cost of choosing, and it sits at the very center of this whole long story, the way a small cold stone might sit at the bottom of a deep warm lake, unseen but always there, shaping the currents above it. Now gently let us turn to the trial, because Dmitry must be tried for a murder he did not commit. And this is one of the longest, saddest, most crowded scenes in the whole story, and you may let it wash over you in broad, soft strokes rather than sharp detail. the way distant thunder rolls over hills long after the lightning has already faded. Lawyers come from the capital, a clever prosecutor and an even cleverer defense attorney, and the whole town crowds into the courtroom to watch. Half of them already certain of Dmitry's guilt, thrilled by the scandal of it all. Witness after witness is called. Old servants speak, doctors speak, Grushenka herself speaks, weeping, defending him now with all her heart, her old mockery burned away by real love at last. Katerina Ivanovna testifies too, and here the story allows itself one more small cruelty, because Katerina, still nursing old wounds of pride and jealousy over Dmitry's love for Grushenka, first speaks in his defense, generously, movingly, and then, provoked, produces a letter Dmitry once wrote her in a drunken, fevered state, a letter that seems, read aloud in that hushed courtroom, to prove his guilt beyond doubt. A letter in which he raved about needing money and being willing to do anything to get it. And then Ivan, still fevered, still half out of his mind, staggers into the courtroom and tries, in broken, desperate sentences, to confess that it was Smerdyakov who did it, that he has the stolen money right there in his pocket to prove it. But he is so clearly unwell, so incoherent, raving even about seeing devils, that his testimony seems more like the ravings of a sick man than a credible confession, and he is carried out in a kind of collapse. In the end, despite everything, despite the truth sitting so close and yet so unreachable, the jury of local peasants and townsmen, moved by the weight of circumstance and the general sense that this wild, reckless young man surely deserved punishment for something, finds Dmitry guilty, and he is sentenced to many years of hard labor in Siberia. Let your breathing slow again here, dear listener, because even from this sorrow something gentle grows. Dmitry, in the days after the trial, changes, softens, in a strange way almost seems to accept his sentence, not because he believes it just, but because he has come to feel, in some deep new place inside himself, that he is guilty of so much else, guilty in his heart of wishing his father dead, guilty of cruelty to Katerina, guilty of a wild and wasted youth, that perhaps this suffering, though it is for a crime he did not commit, is a kind of payment owed anyway, a chance to become, through suffering, a better and cleaner man. He speaks of wanting to sing to God even from the depths of a Siberian mine. And yet the story leaves a door open, gently, for him too. His friends, Alyosha among them, along with Ivan once he recovers, and Katerina, begin quietly planning an escape, a plan to smuggle Dmitry and Grushenka away to America to start a new life together, far from the snow and the mines and the ruined name of Karamazov. And though the story never tells us for certain whether this plan succeeds, it leaves that small warm possibility glowing softly at the edge of the ending, like a lamp left lit in a window for someone who may yet come home. And now, gently, let us turn at last to the smallest and brightest thread in this whole dark tapestry, the thread that belongs to Alyosha and to the children of the town, because it is here, in this quiet corner of the story, that Dostoevsky chooses to end things, not with the courtroom, not with the murder, but with a small boy and his schoolfellows standing by a large grey stone. Throughout the later parts of the story, running alongside all the grief of the trial, Alyosha has become close to a group of local schoolboys, and especially to two of them. Kolya Krasotkin, a clever, proud, fiercely independent boy who likes to seem older and colder than he really is, and poor Ilyusha Snegiryov, a small sickly boy from a poor and humiliated family, whose father, a broken-down former officer nicknamed Wisp of Tow, was once publicly dragged by the beard through the town square by Dmitry, in one of Dmitry's wild rages, an act of cruelty that shamed the whole family terribly, and that little Ilyusha, in his small fierce loyalty, could not bear. So that he bit Alyosha's finger hard when Alyosha first tried gently to make peace on his brother's behalf, and threw stones at the other boys who mocked his ruined father, defending his family's broken honor with a child's whole desperate heart. Alyosha, patient and gentle as always, slowly wins the trust of these boys, helps mend the quarrels between Ilyusha and his schoolfellows, and grows especially close to Kolya, guiding him gently away from his prickly pride toward something softer and kinder. But Ilyusha falls ill, gravely ill, his small body failing him, and as the trial of Dmitry unfolds in the town, in another small room across town, a different, quieter tragedy is unfolding too. A little boy slowly dying in his poor family's small, crowded lodging, his broken father weeping over him, his simple, sorrowing mother nearby, and Alyosha visits often, and gathers the schoolboys, the very boys who once threw stones and were thrown at, to come visit Ilyusha too, to bring him small comforts. A little dog he thought he had lost forever now returned, and trained to do tricks for him, to sit by his bed and be his friends in these last weeks, the way they perhaps should have been all along. And in the end, gently, quietly, without violence, without courtrooms, without pestles or poisons, little Ilyusha dies, simply, the way small sick children sometimes simply do, and the whole town gathers for his funeral, and his poor father weeps over the small grave and scatters bread for the birds the way his son once asked him to, so that the sparrows might come and sing over him. And it is here, dear listener, right here, beside a large grey stone near where Ilyusha used to play, that the whole long story comes finally to rest. Alyosha gathers the boys around him after the funeral, 12 or so of them, Kolya among them, and he speaks to them gently, simply, about Ilyusha, about kindness, about memory. He tells them that they must never forget this moment, never forget how, for a little while, brought together by a dying child, they were good to one another and loved one another, and that even many years from now, grown old and busy and perhaps hardened by the world, if they ever remember this one good moment, this one memory of loving each other purely and openly, it might be enough, all by itself, to save them from becoming cruel, might call them back, even after everything, to their better selves. And the boys, moved, cry out together that they will remember, that they will always remember, and one of them asks, with a child's sudden burst of feeling, whether it's true that we shall all rise again someday and see each other again. And Ilyusha too, and Alyosha answers, smiling through his own tears, that yes, certainly we shall rise, and we shall see each other, and gladly, joyfully, tell each other everything that has happened. And then, laughing now through the last of their tears, the way children can turn from grief to joy in the space of a single breath, they all go off together to Alyosha's family's house for the funeral dinner, and little Kolya, proud independent Kolya, calls out to Alyosha, half laughing, half in wonder, "Karamazov, can it really be true, what religion says, that we shall all rise from the dead and live again, and see one another again, all of us, and Ilyushechka too?" And Alyosha says, "Certainly we shall rise, certainly we shall see each other, and shall tell each other with joy and gladness all that has happened." And the boys, laughing now, all take hands, and Kolya cries out, "Hurrah for Karamazov!" And the others take up the cry, and together, hand in hand, laughing, they go on, out of the story and into whatever quiet future waits for them beyond its last page. And so, dear listener, that is where we leave them, all of them, the whole tangled, sorrowful, loving family of Karamazovs and the town around them. Dmitry somewhere between a Siberian sentence and a dream of America, learning slowly to carry his suffering like a strange gift. Ivan somewhere between fever and recovery, carrying the terrible knowledge of how far a cold idea, spoken carelessly, can travel before it does its damage. Grushenka softened at last into real love. Katerina left with her wounded, proud heart to mend as best she can. Poor broken Smerdyakov finally at rest, whatever rest such a soul can find. And Alyosha, gentle Alyosha, walking off into the evening light surrounded by a small circle of boys who love him and who will, perhaps, carry a little of his goodness forward into their own long lives, the way a single small flame, cupped carefully in two hands, can be carried a very long way through a very dark night without ever quite going out. Rest now, the story is told. Let the last of it settle over you slowly, like snow settling over that small, quiet Russian town, hushing every rooftop, every fence, every grey stone, until everything is soft and still and safe until morning.